Good evening, and welcome to our discussion forum. Tonight we delve into a highly contentious issue impacting public health, personal freedoms, and economic considerations. Should all forms of cigarette smoking and vaping be completely banned? Joining us are two distinguished experts with differing perspectives. Dr. Ben Carter, a respected public health expert, argues in favor of a comprehensive ban, and Ms. Olivia Vance, a policy analyst, advocates for strong regulation rather than outright prohibition. We will begin with opening statements from each guest, followed by moderated discussion, and conclude with closing remarks. Dr. Carter, would you please begin?
Thank you, Ms. Reed. The evidence regarding traditional cigarette smoking is unequivocal and has been for decades. It is a primary cause of preventable death globally, responsible for devastating cancers, crippling respiratory conditions like COPD, and severe cardiovascular diseases. We've made progress in reducing smoking rates, but the battle is far from over. And now we face a parallel threat: electronic cigarettes or vaping. Initially, some proponents suggested vaping could be a less harmful alternative. However, the reality emerging is far more complex and deeply worrying. We are witnessing significant health risks associated directly with vaping, including EVALI, e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury, and accumulating evidence of cardiovascular harm. Furthermore, the long-term consequences remain largely unknown, creating a potentially massive public health gamble. Perhaps the most alarming aspect is the explosion of vaping among adolescents and young adults. This is not accidental. It is fueled by aggressive marketing tactics and a vast array of flavors specifically designed to appeal to young people. Fruit, candy, mint, flavors banned in traditional cigarettes precisely because they attract youth. We are facing a youth vaping epidemic. High doses of nicotine delivered by modern vaping devices are intensely addictive, potentially harming adolescent brain development. Moreover, substantial evidence indicates that vaping acts as a gateway for young non-smokers, significantly increasing their likelihood of initiating combustible cigarette use later. The societal costs are staggering. We bear the burden through increased healthcare expenditures, treating smoking and vaping-related illnesses, and suffer lost productivity due to disease and premature death. Considering the established lethality of smoking and the rapidly emerging serious dangers of vaping, particularly its insidious grip on a new generation, partial measures are insufficient. A comprehensive ban on the sale of all cigarette and vaping products is the only ethically sound and epidemiologically necessary step to protect public health.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Ms. Vance, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Dr. Carter paints a concerning picture, and I absolutely agree that the health risks associated with traditional smoking are severe, and that protecting young people from nicotine addiction is paramount. However, I believe proposing a complete ban on both cigarettes and vaping products is an overly simplistic and potentially counterproductive response to a complex issue. Firstly, we must consider the principle of adult autonomy and individual liberty. While smoking is undeniably harmful, in a free society, adults are generally permitted to make choices regarding their own bodies and lifestyles, even risky ones, provided they understand the consequences. Extending this ban to vaping products ignores the potential role they can play in harm reduction for existing adult smokers. Public Health England, among other bodies, has suggested that vaping is substantially less harmful than smoking combustible cigarettes. For millions of adults who struggle to quit smoking through traditional methods, vaping might represent a viable off-ramp from the most dangerous nicotine delivery system. A total ban eliminates this potential pathway, possibly condemning many smokers to continue using cigarettes, the far deadlier product. Secondly, we must learn from history regarding prohibition. Bans often do not eliminate consumption, they merely drive it underground. A ban on cigarettes and regulated vaping products would almost certainly lead to the proliferation of a vast, unregulated black market. These illicit products would lack any quality control or safety standards, potentially posing even greater risks than the current regulated ones. Remember the E-Valley outbreak Dr. Carter mentioned? It was largely linked to illicit THC cartridges containing vitamin E acetate, not standard nicotine e-liquids from reputable sources. Enforcing such a ban would also divert significant law enforcement resources and likely lead to unintended social justice consequences. Furthermore, there are substantial economic repercussions to consider. A ban would eliminate numerous jobs in manufacturing, retail, and distribution, and eradicate significant tax revenues currently generated from tobacco and vaping product sales. Funds often earmarked for public health initiatives. Instead of prohibition, I advocate for a robust, evidence-based regulatory framework. This includes strict enforcement of age verification, comprehensive restrictions on marketing practices, banning flavors proven to appeal primarily to youth, implementing strict product safety standards, and appropriate taxation. This approach allows us to address youth uptake seriously while preserving potential harm reduction avenues for adults and avoiding the predictable failures of prohibition.
Thank you both for those comprehensive opening statements. You've clearly defined the core tension. Dr. Carter highlights the critical need to protect young people from a burgeoning vaping crisis, while Ms. Vance emphasizes harm reduction possibilities for current adult smokers and the principle of autonomy. How do we reconcile these competing priorities?
Ms. Reed, with all due respect to the concept of harm reduction, the evidence supporting vaping as an effective cessation tool on a population level is quite weak and often contradictory. Many studies show limited success rates, and a significant number of individuals end up becoming dual users, continuing to smoke cigarettes while also vaping, thereby potentially increasing their overall exposure to toxins. The theoretical benefit for a subset of adult smokers cannot justify the documented widespread harm being inflicted upon adolescents. The so-called gateway effect is not mere speculation. Longitudinal studies consistently show that young people who initiate nicotine use with e-cigarettes are substantially more likely to transition to combustible tobacco. The marketing, the flavors, the very design of these products. It's a calculated strategy targeting youth, creating a new generation addicted to nicotine under the guise of a safer alternative. We cannot sacrifice the health of our youth for a debatable adult harm reduction strategy. Prioritizing youth protection necessitates removing these products from the market entirely.
Dr. Carter, attributing the rise in youth vaping solely to vaping products themselves, oversimplifies the complex factors influencing adolescent behavior, which include peer pressure, mental health issues, and socioeconomic factors. While the gateway theory is debated, correlation doesn't automatically equal causation. It's possible that young people predisposed to risk-taking behaviors are more likely to try both vaping and smoking, regardless of which comes first. Regarding harm reduction, while it's not a perfect solution and dual use is a concern, we shouldn't dismiss the numerous anecdotal reports and cohort studies suggesting that for some dedicated smokers who have failed with other methods, vaping has been instrumental in quitting cigarettes completely. Dismissing this potential benefit outright seems unnecessarily rigid. The key is not elimination, but targeted control. We can, and should, implement much stricter regulations specifically designed to curb youth access and appeal, rigorous age verification, eliminating child-friendly flavors while perhaps allowing some less appealing options for adults trying to switch, plain packaging, and banning all lifestyle marketing. This allows us to tackle the youth issue directly without resorting to a full ban that negatively impacts adults and fosters illicit trade.
Let's shift focus to the practical implementation. Ms. Vance, you raised concerns about black markets resulting from a ban. Dr. Carter, you seem to imply that current or proposed regulations are insufficient. What can we learn from international experiences or existing evidence regarding the enforceability and effectiveness of total bans versus strong but perhaps complex regulatory frameworks?
History consistently shows us that prohibition of popular substances is fraught with difficulties. Look at alcohol prohibition in the U.S. It didn't stop drinking. It created organized crime, corrupted law enforcement, and led to the consumption of dangerous, unregulated alcohol. A ban on cigarettes and regulated vaping products would almost certainly lead to the proliferation of a vast, unregulated black market. These illicit products would lack any quality control or safety standards, potentially posing even greater risks than the current regulated ones. Remember the E-Valley outbreak Dr. Carter mentioned? It was largely linked to illicit THC cartridges containing vitamin E acetate, not standard nicotine e-liquids from reputable sources. Enforcing such a ban would be incredibly resource-intensive and challenging. Consider Australia's experience with prescription-only vaping. Reports suggest a thriving black market has emerged. Conversely, countries like the UK, which adopted a regulatory approach accepting vaping as a harm reduction tool, while implementing controls like advertising restrictions and age limits, have seen continued declines in smoking rates alongside managed vaping prevalence. It suggests regulation, while complex, can be more effective and manageable than a blanket ban. We need adaptable regulations that respond to emerging evidence, not a blunt instrument like prohibition.
Ms. Vance paints a picture of regulatory success that, frankly, doesn't align with the youth vaping crisis we see in many regulated markets, including the UK and North America. Partial measures like flavor restrictions or advertising limits are often circumvented by the industry. Companies find loopholes, market through social media influencers, or develop new products that skirt the regulations. Tax increases might deter some, but nicotine addiction is powerful, and illicit markets can undercut legal prices. The argument that black markets are an insurmountable consequence of bans is often overstated. While illicit trade is a challenge, it exists even with legal sales. Strong enforcement, coupled with public health campaigns, can manage illicit markets. The public health damage caused by legally sanctioned widespread addiction, particularly among youth, is arguably a far greater and more certain harm than the potential risks of a manageable black market. Look at jurisdictions moving towards stricter controls. New Zealand's innovative, though now repealed, generational ban aimed to phase out smoking entirely. Bhutan had a near-total ban for years. While challenges exist, the direction towards eliminating commercial access to these uniquely harmful products is the one supported by the scale of the health crisis. Current regulations have simply not been sufficient to protect our children.
We are approaching the end of our discussion time. Dr. Carter, could you please provide your closing statement?
Certainly. Throughout this discussion, the fundamental point remains unchanged. Both traditional cigarettes and modern vaping devices pose severe, unacceptable risks to public health. Cigarettes are a known killer on a massive scale. Vaping, while potentially less harmful in some respects for existing smokers, introduces its own set of dangers, including lung injury, cardiovascular effects, and unknown long-term consequences. Crucially, vaping has ignited an epidemic of nicotine addiction among young people, threatening to reverse decades of progress in tobacco control and creating lifelong health burdens. Our primary responsibility as a society, and certainly within public health, must be to protect the population, especially the most vulnerable. The regulatory approaches discussed, while well-intentioned, have demonstrably failed to adequately shield adolescents from the allure and addiction of these products. They represent incremental measures against an aggressive industry adept at navigating restrictions. The potential for harm reduction among a fraction of adult smokers cannot outweigh the certainty of harm inflicted upon a new generation. Therefore, the only ethically responsible and truly effective public health strategy is a comprehensive ban on the sale and distribution of all cigarette and vaping products. It is a bold step, but one necessitated by the magnitude of the threat we face.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Ms. Vance, your closing remarks.
Thank you. Dr. Carter's commitment to public health is clear, but I maintain that a complete ban is an impractical, overly intrusive, and ultimately counterproductive policy. It disregards the principle of adult autonomy and eliminates a potentially significant harm reduction tool for millions of adult smokers who wish to quit deadly combustible cigarettes, but have struggled with other methods. Prohibition doesn't work. A ban will inevitably spawn a dangerous, unregulated black market, making products potentially more hazardous and harder to control, while simultaneously eliminating jobs and vital tax revenue. The challenges of enforcement would be immense, diverting resources from other critical areas. The solution lies not in prohibition, but in smart, targeted, and adaptable regulation. We must rigorously enforce age restrictions, ban marketing and flavors appealing to minors, mandate strict product safety standards, and utilize taxation strategically. This balanced approach allows us to aggressively combat youth uptake, which is absolutely essential, while preserving options for adults and avoiding the severe, predictable downsides of a total ban. We need evidence-based policy that addresses specific harms effectively, rather than a sweeping measure that infringes on liberties and risks creating worse problems than it solves.
Thank you, Dr. Carter and Ms. Vance, for sharing your expertise and distinct viewpoints on this complex and critical issue. You have clearly articulated the difficult balance between the urgent need to protect public health, particularly our youth, and considerations of individual freedom, harm reduction, and the practical consequences of prohibition versus regulation. We hope this discussion has provided our audience with valuable insights. Thank you for joining us.